Hey everybody, welcome back, San Diego Comic-Con 2022. We are here with Sofia Warren, who has written a book called Radical, My Year with a Socialist Senator. She spent a year as an embedded cartoonist in the office of New York State Senator Julius Salazar, turned it into it's not really a graphic novel. Would you describe it as a graphic novel?
I'd say a graphic memoir.
Graphic memoir. We're going to talk about that. What inspired you to follow Julia Salazar for a year and kind of get embedded into her office and campaign?
I was living in her district and was not a particularly politically engaged person as far as state politics at the time, but the campaign was just a really lively force in the neighborhood. It was pretty unavoidable. Just people canvassing on every corner and posters in the bodegas. I really had not seen that kind of presence with this level of race before, and I had been there for many years. So it was coming, in 2018, so we were in the middle of the Trump presidency. I felt really inspired by the race and was curious about this person who was my age and with whom I had friends in common and had never met, but felt kind of a closeness to. And so I was really curious about what actually happens once she was elected and had to go through the work of actually legislating. So that's how it got started.
So you do a lot of cartooning for things like the New Yorker, short cartoon, like, typical New Yorker cartoons, those that are familiar with it. This is a different type of project for you. When was the point where you said, was it always from the beginning, like, I'm going to turn this into a memoir, or was there a point along the way where you said, oh, this is going to be a memoir? Did it start as something else and then turn into this?
It was always a book. I think initially I didn't want myself to have a presence in the book. I wanted to kind of be a fly on the wall and just document. It became pretty clear as I was structuring the narrative that having my character there as a sort of grounding element for the reader was an important thing. It also plays a role in the emotional arc of the story. It was a really meaningful experience for me personally, and as I was going through the process of writing it, it just felt like that was an important thing to have structure the book and be a part of it. But no, it was always meant to be a book. I think in part that's because for me, I felt like I need time to get to know people, and so I wanted it to be kind of a longer timeline where I would have time, a number of months at least, to spend with this team and with organizers around her so that I could feel more comfortable talking about it.
What were the biggest surprises and or challenges that you encountered during this year, spending time with them, and then maybe doing the book? Either one.
Yeah. The first, I'm just laughing at this rock show going on behind us. It's for us, I assume. The biggest surprise, probably, to be honest, is that I expected that I would just kind of camp out in the office. And I also had this idea that this was a really big year for tenants' rights legislation. And so going into it, I had this sense that everyone for a period of 6 months straight will be working on this one goal of tenants' rights in this office, and I'll just sit there and take it all in. And that's not really how government works. There are a lot of other things going on, and so that tenants' rights legislation really didn't hit. People were moving forward on it, but it didn't really hit its intensity until quite late in the season. But the other thing that was surprising to me is that there was not this physical office that I had imagined for the entire year, actually, because they were new to government and they didn't have a physical space yet. And it was just for various administrative and bureaucratic reasons, that issue of getting a physical space wound up being a pretty big one. And so, the team was working out of food courts. They were in temporary spaces that had no heat, had holes in the wall. Not something that I would have expected going in.
Talk to me about the challenge of visually telling the story. I would imagine that I think about what would go on in an office or in a camp, walking around the city, having meetings with people. It's just a lot of conversations. That it's the same thing, the same type of setting. So what's the challenge of you have to do different drawings and make it visually engaging?
Yeah, it was definitely a lot of meetings. But it wasn't only meetings. I mean, to be honest, they didn't have this physical office, as I said, reliably, so it did mean that a lot of the spaces that they were having these meetings in were pretty unconventional. You know, the food court was, I thought, a pretty dynamic visual space. There were, interruptions, people coming by who knew various staffers from church or whatever, and, someone walking by with like a bagel, whatever it was. Another component that I think helped in terms of keeping it visually engaging is that this team came from a background in organizing, and they were really plugged into and accountable to and committed to organizers outside of the office. And so this legislation that I was following, the tenants' rights legislation, was being shepherded by this group of a coalition of tenants' rights groups from across the state. And their work did involve a lot of rallies and marches, protests, that kind of thing, that were quite visually stimulating. But then just on top of all of that, I come from a background in animating and with cartoons as well. I think my eye is really trained towards things like gesture, and I take a lot of joy in trying to sort of capture human elements and character through the drawings. So for me, it was also about, because I spent so long with this team, I do have a sense of what their mannerisms are and that kind of thing. And so being able to capture that, even if it was just a meeting in a room, but the way that people stand and the different, tics that they have with their hands or whatever, that was all part that I wanted to be in the book.
What was the most exciting thing that happened over the course of that year?
The tenants' rights legislation was like a really big deal. It's something that I wouldn't necessarily have known to be this excited about going into it, but it was profoundly impactful. It was the bills that ended up passing were beyond, I think, even the most ambitious dreams of this coalition of tenants' rights organizers just a few years prior. So there was this real sea change and a lot of incredible organizing, truly just to see from the beginning, to be able to map this strategy out and see it come to fruition in such a rewarding way was really, really cool.
What do you hope that readers take away when they read your book?
I know this is a very corny thing to say, but I found it to be a profoundly hopeful experience personally, and that's what I hope readers will take from it. I think even, this continues to be the case that the experience for me gave me a lot of tools as far as thinking about change and how to affect it, my role as a citizen, my, potential to engage with organizing, if not government. I'm not necessarily going to run for office, but I do feel really tapped into a sense of organizing as a result of this book. And there's so much joy and connection that comes out of that work on just like a individual level, but it also, zooming out, when things are happening in the news that make me scared, I think it's been really grounding to know that there is a system in place and people who are really skilled at this tool that we have as citizens, which is organizing. And so that really does leave me with a lot of hope, and I hope that readers get that too.
Well, the book is called Radical, My Year with the Socialist Senator. It's available from IDW Books, and check it out. This is Sophia Warren. Stay tuned for more coverage, San Diego Comic-Con 2022.